All right, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of That Which Binds Us. I'm here with my brother Jack, and today we are going to be talking about something that's been really important to us in the last few years, which is traveling solo and what that looks like. So, Jack, Jack, what do you have there? What are you holding in your hand?
I didn't know you could see it. I was trying to keep it out of the frame, just so I'm not trying to brag or anything.
It's around your neck. How'd you forget that you were wearing it?
I didn't think it was visible, I guess, is the thing. But I guess now that we're talking about it, this is my half marathon finisher medal. So, I'm really that isn't pretty impressive, right?
That's impressive.
I'm not one to brag typically, but there's just something about finishing a half marathon at a 10-minute, 45-second per mile pace that kind of changes you, and you kind of realize, like, wow, I am really fast and good at sports and running. So I'm kind of like allowing myself this moment to share with the world how much better I am than everyone else. If that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah. So that's funny because I did a half marathon about 3-ish years ago.
Yeah.
And
what was your time?
I think I still have my medal.
You got a medal too? I think they only give medals to people who finish really fast times.
No, it was more of a participation medal. Was the medals that I got.
Oh,
I don't know
but
about
you got one though?
I did. And if I'm remembering the times that I had, I think I was on a like 7 minute 59 second pace. So just short of 8 minutes was my pace.
Okay. But I bet you were running downhill the whole time. Were you on one of those like downhill? My race was like had a little bit of hills even.
I mean, I might as well have been running downhill because of how fast I was going. That's how fast I felt like I was going. And it just felt so natural.
Okay.
And
all right,
and
cool.
weightless. I felt kind of weightless.
Oh, really? So you're telling me your legs didn't feel like they weighed 400 pounds each by the end of it? Because mine did. And I cried at the end because it was so painful.
Well, congrats on finishing your half marathon.
Thank you.
When you sent me your times, I was really impressed that the last few miles were faster than the first few miles.
The first few miles were very slow.
I can just picture the mental battle going on in your brain, and that's cool that you finished faster than you started.
I did realize something, and this is just a little running tidbit. Now, I mean, you're talking to two professional runners now, right?
Right.
We both understand running.
Runners.
It was so surprising to me how much I had left in the tank. Because come like mile 6 or 7, I really didn't think I had anything left in the tank. I was like, fuck, this is gonna be really bad. And then come mile 9 and 10, I was like, oh, I can pick it up because like I'm so close to finishing. So I just like sprinted the whole time because it hurt. I mean, of course it hurt, but it was like I can get there. I know I can get there.
Yeah.
And then once I'm done, it's done. So I was also pretty surprised by my last 2 miles because I don't know if even in my training I really ran any mile as fast as I had run those 2 miles. And that was my 12th and 13th mile.
That's awesome. Yeah, because the half marathon's 13.1,
miles. Yeah. If you
okay.
Yeah, take a look here. 13.1.
On the lanyard of the medal you received.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. But no. So yeah, the reason I am wearing my medal and I am going to take it off because it's making me sweat because it's so heavy is because that was my most recent solo trip. I drove to Kansas City by myself to run in a half marathon by myself. Just for the heck of it. And I joke about it, but I am actually pretty proud of myself for that. It was a really, really fun time and a lot of prep and training to get into it. So, but yeah, today George and I are going to talk about the different solo trips that we've taken. We both like to travel, which I don't know. Is that, George, you explain this while I take this off. Is that like a family thing? What do you think our love for like traveling and stuff has been?
You act like you have to like unbuckle this medal.
No, I have to take.
How long is it going to take for you to remove this medal?
I have to take my headphones off, so I'm not going to actually hear what you're saying. I just have to take the headphones off so that I can take the medal off because it's so hot. It wasn't worth the bit.
Doing that. Okay, he took his headphones off. I'm actually really jealous of his medal. It's a little bit bigger than mine, and it looks like real metal. Mine was kind of a red and blue kind of plasticky metal. But okay, he's got his headphones on. Yeah,
So you weren't talking about your story that whole time?
no, I was. You'll hear it back on
Great.
the episode.
I can't wait to find out.
Yeah, so I would say your question was, do I like traveling?
Well,
What was your question?
hey, George, do you like traveling? It was, where do you think that comes from? Like, why do we like traveling? Like, because that is something that you and I have both done, is taken some solo trips just by ourselves.
Yeah.
And I don't, like, why, where did we get that? Did our family travel enough for us to really, like, fall in love with that? Did we both separately come to that? What do you think yours comes from?
Yeah, I just love going to new places. I'm not really a homebody, I would say. So I like to yeah, travel to other places. Even growing up, when I would go to friends' houses and hang out with people, I would always prefer to go hang out at their houses, just to have
really?
like a new experience. Yeah, so I've always loved traveling, and seeing new things. Yeah, I don't know. What about you?
I don't know. Yeah, I was just talking with a friend about this today. I like road trips a lot. I like being in my car. I like putting on like music and just listening to a ton of songs and passing the time in my car driving somewhere new. Recently, like right before this Kansas City trip, the weekend before or 2 weekends before, I drove all the way to Austin by myself, just because I had a thing to do, and I'll talk about that later. But I just love being in my car. I always loved Colorado road trips. I always loved, like, I've driven all the way to South Carolina. The family, we all drove to like Washington, D.C. together, all from Kansas. So basically anything worth driving to from Kansas is over 10-hour drive other than Kansas City. And I've just always liked that. I've always liked those road trips. So I, maybe similar to you, I like seeing new things. I like trying new things. But even I've gone to Portland 3 times at this point, 4 times just to go and see you. And I love it every time. I love it more every time. Like, it's not about seeing something new. It's about like going back to a place that I love. And I really don't mind the trip of it all. I don't mind living out of a suitcase for a little bit. I don't mind living on a couch for a little bit. Like, I just really enjoy the act of being somewhere that isn't home for a little bit. I definitely, obviously, like anybody does, get homesick. But yeah, I do love travel a lot.
Yeah, I love long road trips too. I think it's like ingrained in our blood because we were always driving from Wichita to El Dorado, which was like a little over 30 minutes. So from as long as I can remember, we were going on little short road trips, listening to music, and yeah, just hanging out in the car together.
Yeah, I wouldn't have even connected that, but that's a really good point. Like, I drove 30 minutes every day to school. Like, every day I'd wake up, drive, put on my favorite music, and just like listen and love being in the car. I did that twice, like 30 minutes there, 30 minutes back. I love
Right.
being in the car. I really like being in the car. I like being in the driver's seat. I like an excuse to stop at Quick Trip and get a bunch of snacks. I like
Right.
an excuse to play my music way too loud. And that, I think there is something about the solo trip of it all that, like, being by yourself
Yeah.
in a car, there are no rules, like, other than
Except
regular
for traffic laws.
rules. Other than that, there's like, you get to sing loud, you get to talk to yourself, you get to like play a podcast, you get to change podcast halfway through because you don't like it. Like, you don't have to ask permission for anything. You don't have to ask permission for what you eat or where you go. Like, when you're by yourself, you're just really making that decision by yourself. And I've found that really freeing. So, George, why are we talking about solo trips today on this podcast? Like, what, have you even taken any solo trips? Like, what is your favorite like solo trip or most memorable solo trip you've ever taken?
Yeah, the most memorable solo trip for me was back in, I think it was 2021, when I was living in Wichita, Kansas. I went car camping on a trip to the Grand Canyon in Arizona. And so that was about 6 days of a trip, and most of it was driving because the Grand Canyon is pretty far away.
Yeah, how far of a drive is that?
I think it was like 15 hours.
I can Google it right now. So why Arizona? Why, like, you're like, I want to take a car road trip. I want to go car camping, and I'm going to go to, why did you choose the Grand Canyon?
I think at this point in my life, like, so I'm like 21 at the time. And so, yeah, they're kind of like two things I'd say that inspired me to go on a trip like this to the Grand Canyon where I'm car camping. One was my friend Andrew Kivett. He's just one of the most adventurous people I know ever. Just like 2 years before this trip I went on, he and I had longboarded across Kansas, the width of Kansas. So starting in Colorado, ending in Missouri. And that was like 430 miles. So we were doing like 30 miles a day on our longboards in the middle of nowhere, Kansas. And so that's something like I would have never done if not for my friend Andrew.
Where did you sleep when you did that?
We slept in just like some random motels in the middle of nowhere, Kansas.
That rules.
So yeah, Colby, Kansas, Hill City, Kansas, Ness County, Kansas. A bunch of random places. So I would have never done that if not for Andrew Kivett. And then just 2 years ago, Andrew Kivett walked across the United States of America.
I remember that. That was crazy.
The width of the U.S. he walked across. So starting in like South Carolina, ending in California. And he did that over the course of a few months as well. So that's kind of like who he is. He has a, massive appetite for adventure. And Andrew was a big part of my life at this point in time. I was like 21. Andrew inspired me to try new things and seek adventure a lot more in my life. And then I'd say like the second thing that inspired me to go on this trip was probably just like my mental state at the time. Like I just had such a intense apathy toward work and school at this period in my life. And typically when you're like in your young 20s, work and school can provide like a lot of identity for people, I feel like. And for me, I just had no motivation to, for my work or school. And so that wasn't a source of identity for me. So luckily I was kind of propelled to look for new ways to find my own identity.
Right.
Rather than kind of regress into a, depressive state. Because of, just a lot of reasons like therapy and support from friends and family and whatever. But so like that kind of, my just like apathy at this point in my life kind of inspired me to just go try something new.
Yeah,
and,
just shake your life up.
Shake things up.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So yeah.
So I did Google it. The Grand Canyon is a 16-hour drive from Wichita. So what was that trip like? Like, how did you prepare for it? Did you book things ahead, or were you just like, on Monday, I'm getting in my car and I'm not going to stop driving until I see Grand Canyon National Park?
So the main preparation I did was the car camping piece.
21, right?
Yeah.
So 21, you're just like there's
like May of 20 of like a month after I just turned 21.
Okay, yeah.
The main thing I prepared for was the car camping piece. That was a lot of the excitement about this trip. Was I had never slept in my car and gone on a trip like this where I was going to be sleeping in my car, and there was like a freedom aspect to that I was really excited about. So I prepared my car for sleeping in, and then did a lot of research on where I'd be able to park my car and sleep when I do get to the Grand Canyon and all the places I would stay along the way.
So where does someone park their car and sleep when they need to sleep in their car?
Great question, Jack. Have you heard of a place in the Midwest? It's sort of a safe haven for all old people to grab just a good Midwestern meal.
We're talking about Cracker Barrel.
Yes, sir. You hit it on the head. Cracker Barrel, every Cracker Barrel has parking for RVs. They just have RV parking space.
Why? Is there like a reason for that?
A lot of their target market is old people who are in RVs, who are like traveling across the U.S. and everything.
Huh.
So, it's known for being a great place to car camp and sleep overnight.
Every Cracker Barrel I've ever seen is right off the highway. So I guess that makes sense why, like, if you're driving through and you got to stop somewhere to sleep, you're always going to find a Cracker Barrel right off the highway.
Yep. And you'll have a breakfast as good as mama's morning pancakes.
And I remember
right in
Mama's
the
morning pancakes were always good.
Yeah. So that's the benefit of Cracker Barrel. So that was my first one. My first night ever sleeping in my car was a Cracker Barrel. So there was like street lamps lighting up the surroundings of my car. There was like one RV a few spots down, and then no one else was in this parking lot. And I want to say this was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, was my first stop.
Oh, so you didn't do it all in one trip?
No,
you made a
correct,
stop.
Yeah, so I went to Albuquerque, stayed at that Cracker Barrel. And so, yeah, sleeping in my car was just like a hurdle I had to mentally get over. It's like that first night was scary for sure. I like covered all my windows. I also had like music playing in a speaker I had because I just didn't want to be scared by every little noise that I hear outside of my car. Kind of wanted some like white noise. And it also got really cold. And I learned that if you have all of your windows like closed and it's below 32 degrees, like freezing, every like breath you take, the condensation of your breath will get on the windows and start to frost on the inside of your car because it's cold. So that just makes it even colder in your car, even though it's cold outside.
So it's better to crack your windows?
Yeah, it's better to crack your windows so like some air gets out and there's some airflow.
You really did do your research.
Yeah, and that one I learned the hard way because I woke up and there was frost on my windows and I was fucking cold.
You woke up in a literal icebox.
Yeah, I was in like the opposite of an igloo. That felt really kind of scary at first, but then when I woke up, there's just the freedom of waking up in the back of your car, crawling to the top side of the driver's side, and then just putting it in drive, and you're just back on the road. The freedom of that, I was not anticipating how good that would feel.
Yeah.
And I felt free as a bird.
That you didn't have to check with anyone. You're just like, we're driving because I'm deciding right now to drive.
Yeah.
That rules.
And after that first night, I felt really capable of sleeping in my car, and like the rest of the trip was going to be okay.
That's awesome. So what'd you do when you were there?
So I spent a day in Albuquerque, kind of exploring. I went on a little trail that they had, walked that. It was like a mile. Yeah, I'd never been to like the Southwest, so that like biome, for lack of a better word, it was really unique to me. It was really like deserty. Yeah, and I'd never seen that before outside of like movies and High School Musical too.
Was it pretty similar? We drove through Utah. We drove through, what was that place in Utah? Moab. Was it similar to that? Kind of like vibes like red clay desert?
Yeah, it wasn't as red like New Mexico, but it was still deserty.
Yeah.
But Arizona gets pretty red.
Right. Okay. Cool. Interesting.
Yeah. So that was all really unique to me and really cool to experience. So yeah, I spent a day in Albuquerque. I went to an art museum there by myself at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday. That was probably one of the loneliest experiences of my life.
Oh, really? You didn't like that?
No, I just, there's something about being in an art museum at 2 p.m. and the only other people there are like old people, and everyone else is at work or school or whatever. And it was not the vibe. I did not enjoy that. I also just wasn't enjoying the art. It was kind of boring.
That's so funny. I mean, I'll probably get there. I recently went to an art museum in Kansas City by myself. I just went to Kansas City by myself. This is one of my stories I'll tell, but I absolutely loved going to an art museum. I went there by myself and just like vibed. I had all the time in the world to just like waste time there, and I loved it. That's funny that we had opposite feelings on an art museum situation.
Well, I don't think art museums as a whole are boring. Like the Portland one is really cool. This Albuquerque one, I was just bored. And I was alone, I think. I was kind of bored. And then, I mean, everything else was kind of similar. Like spend a day in Albuquerque, and that was cool to like be in a new city. I think I stayed the night at the same Cracker Barrel, and then drove to the Grand Canyon from there. Spent a day in the Grand Canyon, drove back, went through Denver, and then got home. And it was interesting, like, because I think my motivation to go on this trip was a lot of what you would expect from someone in like their young 20s who's like struggling with identity. Like I was just like, I want to go find, my purpose and, go discover myself. Like that was kind of the expectations I was placing on the trip. And when I got back, I remember I had therapy like a few days after my trip. And I was like, kind of basically venting to my therapist about like, I don't feel like I learned anything about myself. Like I feel like I went to go learn something about myself and I didn't learn anything about myself. So then I went on this whole rant about like, I don't know, I wrote some of it down because like it was just really interesting to me. But I was like, okay, yeah. So when I had like finally reached my destination of the Grand Canyon after like car camping and driving alone for days and days, and I like walked up the last trail and got to the top and looked out onto the, like one of the 7 wonders of the world. And I had never seen this before. It was my first time. And I looked out and I just like felt nothing. I didn't like feel anything.
Oh no, yeah.
And I remember, talking about that, and then like I don't know. And so I was also venting about like there were so many funny jokes and like one-liners I had in my head throughout this whole trip that like no one else was there to like hear.
Right.
And talking about that, and then I was just talking about how like lonely I felt driving in like the deserts of New Mexico at night all by myself. So I was just venting about all these like different experiences I had alongside the trip, all with the like tone of I didn't learn anything about myself.
Right.
And my therapist is like, George, what do you mean you didn't learn anything about yourself? You just spent 10 minutes telling me everything you learned about yourself.
Yeah.
And I was like, it really, yeah. So then we like backtracked and went through every one of those things that I was kind of complaining about. And he was like, okay, so the jokes and like one-liners and all the like fun you had on your own that would have been so much better with someone, you learned that maybe it would have been nice to have someone there to like tell jokes to and share those one-liners with. And then like the Grand Canyon, when you finally got there and you didn't feel anything, like it was probably hard for you to like comprehend the beauty of it, but it would have been helpful to have someone else there to be like, wow, isn't this so beautiful?
Yeah.
And then you could be like, yeah, this is so beautiful. And so there was that. And then like driving in the deserts of New Mexico alone, and it was dark. Like you learned that it probably would have been helpful to have someone there to help you navigate. Like that would have been helpful. And so there was a lot there to like unpack. But really what I learned is just like, I wanted to learn what my purpose was. I wanted to learn, like, I wanted to discover myself. That's what I was going there to learn.
Yeah.
And I didn't learn those things. And so I summarized the whole trip as I didn't learn anything about myself. Yeah. But he like my therapist helped me unpack that. I learned so much about myself. Like I learned that I really do want people. I really do want to experience these things with people, and I get so much joy out of it. And so I want people with me, but I also learned that I'm capable of going on a trip like this on my own, and I don't need people to go on a trip like this. But I learned that I want people. So I just gained such a like deeper appreciation for experiencing things with people and going on adventures with people. And my therapist helped me like discover that about myself when I had summarized the whole trip as I didn't learn anything about myself, but I learned so much about myself. So yeah, that's kind of my tangent on my Grand Canyon trip.
That's awesome. I can also imagine the disappointment of not feeling the catharsis of having that discovery in real time, like of getting to the Grand Canyon and wanting the catharsis of it being as big of a moment as you were hoping it would be, and then for it not to be like that, to still be able to say that it was a success, it's probably hard. I can imagine that was like, yeah. So did you ever, even after talking with your therapist, did you get that catharsis from being able to reframe what you learned?
Yeah, the timing of what I learned was what became apparent to me, because it wasn't in the moment I was
Right.
learning these things. It was after the trip when I was able to process it. I learned that I was capable of going on a trip by myself, and I also learned that I love experiencing things with people. But it took me processing the trip after to realize that.
Yeah. That's did that feel like now when you see that trip, like did it actually change the way you viewed that trip? Like are you able to
Yeah.
see that trip now as a positive?
Oh yeah. Like I think about it all the time, and like you could ask Abby, my girlfriend. Like I talk about it all the time.
Really?
I talk about how much I enjoyed it and what I learned and all these things. But in the moment, I was kind of feeling lonely and kind of numb a little bit
Yeah.
during the trip. But after, I it's something I just like have so much pride in, and like really just believe that I'm capable because I have this experience in my life that I can draw back on.
Right.
So yeah, the timing of when I learned something about myself became like really noticeable. It's like it wasn't during, it was after that I learned that.
Interesting. That's awesome
Yeah.
though. That's such a great experience. And you were 21 and you're 25 now?
24. Yeah.
24.
I was 21 at the time.
Do you recommend more people like do stuff like that? Like if you're talking to one of our brothers who's 21, are you like, you know what you should do? You should go take a solo trip and just see what you're made of. Or do you think there are other ways for people to learn those things about themselves?
My like appreciation for the people and relationships I had like became so much deeper through this trip, because I like dove down into the depths of loneliness and like my own self, like being alone with myself. What does that feel like? I like dug down and experienced that to the fullest. And I've always like in my life kind of had like a fascination with being alone and trying to feel like that's comfortable and something I want. Like I've tried to make that work. And going on this solo trip like was just kind of the climax of that for me, of like trying to be alone and be happy, trying to really make that work. Because like, I mean, just picture it. Like if you can be alone and be happy, like
Yeah.
think about it. Like you don't have to deal with people. You don't have to deal with like all of the pain that comes with having relationships in your life. Like you can just completely avoid it because you get to be alone. And I think there was some like utility behind that I always was interested in, like if I can manage to be happy alone. And so yeah, my entire life up until that point I would kind of just like dip my toe in the water of being alone and trying to have that bring value to my life. But I learned that I like don't really want that, because experiences like going to the Grand Canyon for me would have so much more value if I had someone there to share it with. So yeah, so I would recommend that for anyone who feels like they don't appreciate the people around them as much as they would like to. That's what I would recommend it for, because that's what it did for me. And I would recommend like trying to have an open mind toward like what you're going to learn about yourself, because if you go for a specific reason to learn like a specific thing about yourself, you might get disappointed. But you're going to learn so much about yourself that you didn't know you were going to learn about yourself. So to answer your question, yes, I would recommend it for anyone who wants to learn something about themselves.
All right, George. So we talked a little bit about your experience of going to New Mexico.
Arizona. I drove through New Mexico.
So I'm just going to take that from again. Because I was listening. I promise I was listening. Stupid.
This sucks. Why do we even do a podcast?
Sucks.
Fuck.
This sucks. Whose idea was this bullshit?
No, you're doing great. Doing great.
So George, you shared a little bit about, well, not a little bit. You talked
For a long time. God damn, George. Shut the fuck up. You were talking for way too long. It's supposed to be our podcast, not the George podcast. Shut the fuck up.
That which binds us, more like that which is what I did and not care about you and you what you say. Okay.
What are you trying to say, Jack? What are you trying to say? Speak from the heart. It's
I'm
okay.
trying to say
Use
I
your words.
quit.
Oh,
I quit.
Jack, quit. You're quitting?
That was it. I've had it up to here. Okay. So George, you talked a little bit about your trip to Arizona, and I find myself curious about what is next for you. Where are you going to go by yourself? It can't be back home to Kansas because that's cheating. Are you, or do you imagine yourself ever traveling again by yourself? And if so, where would it be?
I think I've learned so much about myself and how I like to travel that I do think I want to go experience new adventures with people. So one trip I have planned that I'm really excited about is with my girlfriend Abby, and we're planning to go to Japan after she graduates law school. So I'm very excited about that. We're going to do all the touristy things. And it's going to be a blast. We're going to do it hopefully in like May of next year, depending on our schedules and everything. So yeah, super
If
excited
you had
about that.
I know you've been talking about Japan a lot. Is that like the one that you wanted to go to? Like, is there one like outside of Japan that you're like, God, if I could just hit Japan before I'm 30 or before I'm dead?
Yeah. I've always wanted to go to the moon. That's top on my list for sure.
Hell yeah. Cool.
So if I could do that at some point, that'd be really cool. But Japan
Right.
is definitely at the top of my list. That's always somewhere I've wanted to go.
You know what they say, George? If you shoot for the moon, you'll miss and hit Japan. If you shoot for the moon, even if you miss,
You'll go to the sun.
even if you miss, you hit the Japan.
You hit the Japan.
So that is a saying that people have been saying.
They do say
And
Mars is kind of like the Japan of outer space. They do say that.
They say that?
Yep.
Sick. All right. Well, I will say I don't think anything that we just said anybody has ever said before. I just think that's really important for our audience to know.
Remember, Japan is...
Remember that.
Well, actually, Japan is the Mars of Earth.
Japan is the stars of the moon.
When the stars align, people go to Japan. That's what I say.
Is it really what you say? I just can't keep this straight anymore. Who's saying what anymore?
I want to go to the moon, but more realistically, Japan is at the top of my list of places I'd like to travel to.
And I can't wait for you.
Thank you.
That is going to be such a fun trip, and I am going to go with you. You just don't know it yet.
Oh, shit. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to do some nerdy things. There's a Nintendo museum there that I'm excited about. There's a Mario World there that's kind of like a theme park. I'm going to go there. The ages is six and older, so luckily I qualify.
You make the cut.
I do make the cut, so I'm excited about that. I also finished in...
So are they turning down 5-year-olds at the door?
Wait.
If a 5-year-old shows up and they're like, sorry, excuse me, look at the sign. Check the sign. Back off.
Maybe you have to have an adult
Get
with
the
you
fuck
if you're
outta
below
here.
6.
No, that
Well,
makes
they're
no
not
sense.
letting unaccompanied 7-year-olds in. I don't know what I read.
I don't know. Look at the sign. Read the sign.
I don't.
Sign
speak
says 5 and up.
Japanese.
That's true. I don't know why I told you to read the sign. You don't speak Japanese.
So those are high on my list. There's a hike that I think we're gonna do where you can go through in Kyoto. I think it was. That's just south of Tokyo. In case you didn't know. Just
This
50
man's been doing his
miles,
research.
south of Tokyo. You can take the bullet train there and back. In case anyone was wondering.
I'm so impressed with you right now.
Thanks. Pretty much a local at this point. And so
Don't speak the language yet, but
there's a hike we're really excited about where you get to go to a bunch of old like kind of monasteries / temples up in like mountains. So they take you to them and talk about the history. And yeah, it'll be a really cool experience. And then all the food. I'm really excited to try a bunch of new foods. Abby and I have been working our way up because we currently both don't really like sushi, don't really like raw food, like raw fish. So we have been practicing, and currently we are eating fully cooked sushi, like fried sushi. And we're working our way up slowly but surely, so we can eat
So
raw
it's like
food
slowly
by the time we're
frying it for a little bit less time every time until it's raw.
done. Yeah, we asked the waiter, could you cook this 3/4 of the way through?
Medium rare.
Medium rare sushi. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's my next trip I have on my schedule. And that's kind of my story, Jack. That's me in a nutshell in my solo trips. I'd love to hear about your solo trips and what you want to talk about today, because this is also your podcast.
Yeah. Oh, it's a two-person
Yes,
podcast.
it is.
That you guys aren't going to understand that. George and I went on a little rant and we were joking, but I'm going to cut that part because it was me just embarrassing myself. So that joke doesn't land. And now this joke also doesn't land.
Well, we have to cut one of them.
Because,
Or we could cut.
Because, are we cutting this part? Let's leave this in.
Well, if I say the N word, we'll have to cut it. Okay, so give me your favorite solo trip of the last few years. What were you most excited about?
So I will say, being divorced kind of turns every trip into a solo trip because I'm just by myself a lot. But because I'm divorced now, I have taken it upon myself to continue traveling about as much as I was before, which has been really fun. I've gone on 5 trips that I can think of off the top of my head since I've been divorced.
Goddamn.
That have been really, really fun. Most of them were just weekend trips, but it was a good opportunity for me to, like, number one, like, prove to myself that my life didn't end just because I divorced. Like, it changed my life completely, but I don't have to change this part about my life that I love, which is I love to travel. I just am doing it much, much differently now, which is fine. And I've actually learned that I really, really enjoy. Maddie and I traveled a lot. That was like our whole thing was every year we would go on multiple trips a year. We've been to Italy together. We've driven across the country both ways together. From Kansas, we went to South Carolina on a car trip. We've driven to Nashville together. We've driven to Portland with George. So it was just like, that's been very formative, I think, part of my life, and my relationship with her was just like traveling a ton. And I really didn't want to lose it. So, yeah, I think far and away my favorite trip was seeing you in Portland. And this was like a month after the divorce. So I was in, you can imagine a state. I was in, the state was Oregon.
He went there.
Is this thing on?
Is this thing on?
Yeah, I was doing badly. I did not feel good about the way my life was headed. It felt, I was scared. I was, yeah, as you can imagine, someone a month into a divorce would feel. I was crumbling. And I really wanted to be with my brother George, and my other brother Adam also met us there. And it was great. But while I was in Portland with Adam and George, we hung out, we did our thing. It was really fun. Separate from that, I rented a car and took an entirely separate trip just by myself to a hot spring in Oregon that I had been to before with Maddie. But I went by myself this time, obviously, because I'm by myself. And it was really delightful. It was really great. And there's just something about that place that I believe is like sacred. Like, it just like is such a special place. And I feel like I talk to everybody I know about it, and it is, maybe I'll figure out how to talk about it in a way that isn't just like so ooh-woo up here, crazy, but it just is. It's very, I don't know. It's just magical.
Yeah, because
there's
there
and like
the hot spring, and what else is there?
Well, it's in the mountains. So you drive up into a mountain. So like the air is fresher. You're right on a river. So like you just always, the white noise you always hear is the river just rushing through it. The entire place is powered by the river that runs through it. Like the entire place. So there's a giant like generator that the water runs. That all of the water that is hot is heated by hot springs water. So they've like dug deep in, grabbed hot springs that are like the water is literally being heated by the lava inside of the mountain that it's on.
That's so cool.
It's just so dope. And it is also just like really sacred land, both like literally to Native Americans, but also like the way they keep it in such a sacred way that is just beautiful. And you feel it when you're there. It's so tender and important to everybody there. And like people like cry about this. Like it's a living, breathing plot of land. And when you go there, you feel that. So I went there. I've been there once before with Maddie. And I wanted to go there by myself because it's just like a place you go to get away. It's a retreat. It's a hot springs resort, basically. And because I had been there before, I met a few friends, and they offered me a place to stay for free. So I just went and I stayed there. And for 3 days, I just like went and sat in the hot springs like by myself and just like meditated. I brought a notebook and I wrote a ton of poetry. Also a ton of like just really sad journal entries about like loneliness, which was awesome. Something I found out about myself on that trip was how much I like to write about loneliness, because I had never really experienced loneliness in any sort of real like way. I was always with someone who like saw me and loved me. Then I was by myself, and I had to find myself to see me and love me. And when it was hard for me to find him, when it was hard for me to find Jack, I felt alone. So I would write a lot about that. But this place is just like, it's really beautiful. I start it by saying how beautiful it is because it's also really wacky. It is a clothing optional hot springs and resort. And that was a shock to me at first. The first time I went there, I was like, oh, will I get naked? Like, is that weird? And the second time was like, when can I get my clothes off? Like, when can I just be one with nature and be another animal that exists here and just like sit in these hot springs like the monkeys do and just enjoy it? There are no monkeys in Portland, but you've probably seen those pictures of like those monkeys in the cold weather. They just like sit in hot water. I felt like that. I felt like that for 3 days straight, just like butt naked, sitting in hot water like we were always meant to do. And it was great. And it was like, there's such a community there. There's a group of people who work there. They also live on the land. So it's like, it's a co-op. The people who live there are also working there. So I'm just like living in and among the people who are keeping that land and running the resort. And I just happened to go on a weekend where they shut down the entire resort to guests, I guess, other than me. And it was just like a 3-day long party where it was like, we're just all now here. The people who work here, I'm saying we as if I belong to this group, but we're just all here to enjoy what we work so hard to keep. We're just here to enjoy it. So there were like yoga classes run by the people who live there, only for the people who live there. All of the like hot springs were open. They had a pool party one night, and it was wild. I was in this weird headspace coming from Portland. I'd been hanging out with George and Adam, my brothers.
Not clothing optional, by the way. I
didn't know it was for me, but yeah, I just waited till you guys weren't looking. And then I put my clothes back on as soon as you were looking.
So clothing not optional.
I guess everything's clothing optional if you're like brave enough.
That's true. That's good. Yeah, exactly.
So I'm thinking, I'm processing with George and Adam the divorce and how I'm feeling, and I'm going on this solo trip to this hot springs, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to get here, and I'm just going to say yes to everything. I'm going to see what I've got. I'm going to see what I'm made of. I don't really know any of these people other than the person I'm staying with, and I'm just going to say yes to everything. And I show up, and immediately somebody offers me, he's like, hey, we're having a pool party. Everybody's going to be like naked and it'll be fun. And like, it'll just be a night for us to all to enjoy stuff. We have, and I'm like,
well, I can't say
I'm good.
No.
I'm good. Thank you. I did say no for the record. So it's like, my first thought was like, wait, I did say I wasn't going to say no to anything, but I was immediately met with my first no. And that felt like the correct decision. I don't know how to explain it, but that pool party that night, I genuinely feel like changed my life.
Mm.
Because there was a moment, like the one person I knew didn't come for the first little bit to the party, so it was just me and like 45 other naked people that I didn't know, and I just had to like make friends.
Yeah.
In literally the most vulnerable state I can imagine. Is not only am I in a group of people I don't know, I am also my penis is showing while I'm trying to talk to these people. And it was like, it was so raw and beautiful. Like, I met so many people and they were all so delightful and they were so kind to me and warm and welcome to me. And they all asked my story and they all, like, I was really into like a book of poetry I was reading and they were all asking me about the poetry I was reading. And like, they're like, when are you going to come stay here? And yada, yada. And some guy was like, hey, he was like, I'm so impressed that you did this. Like, this takes so much guts that you came all the way here by yourself and you're here and this is weird. I would like to give you a hug. He's like, I'm trying to be more intentional with telling people when I appreciate them, and I would like to give you a hug. And I was like, yeah, sure. I'll give you a hug. He and I hugged each other front to front, tip to tip, butt naked for 45 seconds. It was like a long hug, and it was so nice. And I tell it now because it's silly. I'm picturing Jack's naked, hugging this other man naked, and like tearing up about it. And he also never met this man, doesn't know this man. This man just like heard about Jack's story, is just coming here. Like, he's just so kind. And there's something about that rawness and that like beautiful humanness of that moment that was amazing. I just will remember it forever. And then right after that, we went to a cuddle party, and it is not what it sounds like. Well, I guess it is only what it sounds like. It was a party where we cuddled. We went into a room, and I helped them. I put mattresses on the floor, and we laid on the floor, and we cuddled, and it was amazing. And I fell asleep. I woke myself up snoring, which was kind of embarrassing. I had been snoring, I guess. But yeah, it was just like 30 people in a room laying on the floor, holding each other. Like, I was laying in between somebody's legs and like somebody else was like spooning. It was just like, we're all here and we all want this, we all want touch. Everybody wants to be touched, to be held, to be loved, but like nobody knows how to ask it. And so they're like, obviously consent. There's a huge thing about like consent. This is important. Like, don't cuddle somebody that doesn't want you to cuddle them. But it was just like so nice. And we laid there, and somebody, by the way, George, I don't know if I've told you this. Somebody played the gong. Did you know that you can play the gong? It's not like a thing that you hit and it makes one big loud noise. You can like play it, like make music.
Whoa.
Play out of a gong. It was insane.
Damn.
I promise you all that I was not on any sort of drugs. I felt like I was hallucinating how amazing that music was. It sent me to a place that I'd never been in my life, this gong music, and cuddling with all these people that I didn't know that were so welcoming to me and warm and kind and wanted me to be with them. And then somebody's playing the gong, and I looked around the room, and I literally did not know one person in this room. It was just wild. So, I've been doing gongs
my story. My whole life.
Yeah, we all have. We all have. Any gong that you see, I mean, I don't know. Maybe that is also a valid way to play, is just bang the shit out of it. But the way this lady was playing that gong was magic.
Wow.
That was so crazy.
Damn.
And it put me right to sleep. And I snored, and then I got up, put my clothes on, and I walked to my bed, and I slept for 4 hours, I think, that night. It was like 3 a.m. when I got home. So that was crazy. That was the most memorable solo trip because it was in such a moment of vulnerability where I accepted even more vulnerability in my state of like raw weirdness of being divorced and being broken and feeling weird and by myself. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do one more thing, and I'm going to do another thing that's going to make me feel lonely. And I didn't feel lonely at all. I actually felt like incredibly moved and connected with people that I had never met in my entire life. And now I'm like friends with them on Instagram. I chat with them all. I like them a lot. I think a lot about going back and like even moving back. I would love to move back at some point if I can ever find a time or find a way to make that happen. But in the meantime, I live vicariously through them because I genuinely think that might be one of the most like sacred places in America. And is it maybe one of the only places I've ever been to America? Yes. But if I would go to every single other place in America and still believe that. Recently, the last 3 weeks, I was showing you my little half marathon finisher, but that was a cap of a 3-week, 3-trip month that I had done. Like over the course of 3 weeks, I went to 3 different places. That was mostly just fun. I really love live music. So, 1 weekend I drove to Austin, spent 3 days there by myself in an Airbnb and just listened to music that I loved. And it was great. And I met new people. On the last day, I met this group of people and we hung out the entire day. I met them at 1:00. We just kind of moved from show to show to show.
How'd you get introduced to them?
They were fans. So I went and watched Petey, which I'm sure we've talked about Petey on here, but Petey is Georgian, my favorite artist. I don't know, maybe saying favorite is a bit much, but he's my favorite artist.
He's my favorite.
And we, so I was there 30 minutes early so I can get a good spot. And they were also there. And I was wearing a Petey shirt and they're like, Petey! And I was like, Petey! And then we just talked about what we loved about his music. And we kind of slowly found the group and we're like, okay, what's your name? And we all introduced ourselves to each other. And then after that, it was amazing. We stayed for an extra 5 minutes just to see if we could talk to him. We didn't. And then I was like, well, I'm going to a different band that I love. If you guys want to come with me. And they're like, yeah, let's do that. We don't really have another place to go. So we all went there and we hung out there and we loved that.
Whoa.
And then it was at that point, we were like, wow, this rules. I love us. I love that we're doing this. So, and then I was like, I don't really have any plans. So where are you guys going? I'll go with you guys. We did that. And then after that, it was we were a gang at that point. We were together. So then all of us we watched Chapel Roan together,
Whoa.
which was mind blowing. Chapel Roan ruled. And I was with my new best friends and that was great. And we were just partying. And then after that, we went to something else. And then somebody was like, hey, we have a condo that's 15 minutes from here. Do you just want to go to that condo and watch the rest of this from the rooftop patio that's up there? And I was like, yeah, I do.
100%.
So it ended up that our group had kind of whittled down to 3 of us. And it was just me and 2 others. And we were on this roof chatting. We were talking about God. We were talking about me being divorced. We were talking about them being trying to find love. And it was really interesting and another beautiful moment of connection and humanness. And I've never talked to them again. I went home and it was that was such a great, gorgeous moment of humanity.
Yeah.
And, I follow them on Instagram. I might like their post or message them or I think one person I sent a memory or something.
Yeah.
But, it was gorgeous and beautiful and I wouldn't change anything about it. And they live in Austin and I live in Kansas. So we just don't really ever talk anymore.
Yeah.
But that was another moment of God, you're doing it.
Yeah.
You know how to meet people. You know how to make friends. You know how to make friends who are good, genuine, authentic people. I just gravitate toward people who know how to have a conversation. And I also enjoy having a conversation. So maybe it's a part of me just I can't exist in a room without trying to pull things out of people. But that was delightful. It was amazing. And then literally the next weekend, I flew to Houston, Texas, and Petey was playing, and I went and saw Petey. And again, I went there an hour early, met somebody, and she and I talked, and we were like, hey, let's just go grab a drink real quick. So she and I just we were having a drink before the Petey concert, and we just kept passing music back and forth. Do you know this person? Do you know this person? Because we knew we had the same taste in music. And for an hour, we just hung out, chatted. It was really great. We went to the concert. She was my buddy for the entire rest of the concert. And then I went home. And then we've texted a little bit ever since, but it was honestly, that was just such a great memory for the moment. And we're here now. I just really love seeing humans and finding them and meeting them and connecting on a real level. And I don't think it ever has to turn into anything more than that. It's just finding someone and connecting and making a connection.
Yeah.
I think is the human experience. And then literally the weekend after that, I drove to Kansas City for the Kansas City Marathon.
Capping it off with a half marathon.
With a half Mary. That's what they call it in marathon terms. I don't know if you knew that, but all of my marathon friends call it a half Mary. So
half Mary.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah. You wouldn't know that though. You didn't run it as slow as me. And I think maybe that's just like what the cool people who kind of like aren't trying to prove anything call it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I did blow by some people who were chatting about a half Mary something. I think that's what they were saying. It was kind of blurry because it was all kind of a blur how fast I was going. But it was something like that.
Right, yeah, that's probably it. Actually, that's probably it. So yeah, those are my solo trips.
Yeah,
those are, and then there's one that I had mentioned earlier before about the art museum. That was another. Somebody at work was just like, I don't know why. He was like, you know what you would love? I was like, what? He's like, you would love the art museum in Kansas City. And I was like, okay. And I looked it up. It was open on a Saturday, and I was like, I'm just gonna go to the art museum in Kansas City. And so I also looked it up, and there happened to be a Kansas City soccer game that Friday night. So I just drove, got there Friday night for the soccer game, woke up in the morning Saturday, went to the art museum, loved it. I was there for 4 hours, and I just like looked at every single piece. I was deeply moved by a lot of pieces, and then I got in my car and I drove home.
Wow.
That was like 2 weeks after the divorce. That was like very fresh. So that was definitely a decision born out of I don't know, chaos, I think.
Yeah, that's cool. So did you know you were capable of doing all of this travel and meeting all these new people and making these connections? Did you know you were capable before you decided to go on these trips?
I think there's a difference between knowing I'm capable and proving I'm capable. Like, I think I knew it because I know I'm good at talking to people. Like, I know I've got it in me. I know I like people. I know I attract people. So I knew I could, but then watching myself do it was like so validating and like, oh yeah, I'm fucking doing this. There was something about it that just felt really empowering, and really like, yeah, just it was proving to myself that I was capable of what I've always known I was capable of. But now I have the evidence to back it up.
Yeah, that makes sense because when I am in the same situation, say at a concert, and there's people next to me who I would like to chat with, I can just picture you actually doing it. You actually striking up the conversation and putting yourself out there in that, providing so much, validation for yourself that like you can do it and people do like to talk to you, and you're not, turning people off to this like warm conversation that you're clearly proposing to them. So that's really cool.
Sometimes I get this sense around myself that like, oh, people hate being around me. And that comes from nothing. It comes only from anxiety and insecurity. And there's literally no data I have in my life that would show that people hate me. And yet I still have this like deep seated fear that like, oh, people are always going to hate me anywhere I go. And then I go somewhere and people are like, hey, I like you. Like, let's hang out. And it just continues to validate like, hey, stop listening to that anxious voice in you. Like, it's wrong. It is just wrong.
Yeah.
Like, you are kind, you're sweet, you have a good energy, and people enjoy you. Like, sometimes I just need a win. Sometimes I need that win to quiet the voice that's saying you're a piece of shit. So that's my solo travel experience.
What would be your advice to someone in a similar position?
I think my advice comes a lot more from your story too, which is like, go in with an openness to not knowing what's going to happen. Like, I think you're setting yourself up for failure if you go in expecting to learn something or expecting to experience something or even expecting it to be good and fun. I think if I actually look back to the moment at the hot springs, I was experiencing a lot of anxiety the entire weekend, but when I look back on it, I remember it with fun and like love and that like good energy because I allowed myself to experience the good along with the bad, as opposed to letting the bad stuff ruin the trip. Because there were some bad stuff, like a lot of loneliness. A lot of times I didn't know what to do or I didn't know how to talk to somebody, and I just sat by myself for 4 hours doing nothing. That felt bad. But like, I don't remember those moments nearly as strongly as the moments where I did let go and let loose and enjoy it. And those memories definitely like float to the top, and the memories of negativity sink to the bottom. So yeah, my advice would be go in with an open mind even if it's bad, experience how bad it is. Let that be bad. Let it be a bad moment. Let it not be fun. Don't judge it. Don't be mad at yourself for it. Don't say the trip is ruined, but just like experience it and acknowledge that this is not how I would like this to be going. Okay. Just experience it. Don't change it. Don't even change it. Just let it happen and let it be the way it is. I think you'll remember the trip with a lot more like richness, I think, if you do that, as opposed to trying to label it so soon.
Yeah. Well, Jack, thank you so much for sharing your stories of the trips you've been on.
Thank you for sharing yours.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for listening to us just like talk about our stories.
Yeah.
I kind of wanted this episode to be more like story driven, just because I've heard George tell that story about the Grand Canyon, but I didn't know that was kind of his conclusion about it. So I like listening to you tell that story, George. So thank you for telling that story. Thank you all for listening. I am interested to know, like, to any of our listeners, are you guys solo travelers? Is that something that people do, like just travel by themselves? Usually when I go somewhere by myself, I run into people and they're like, "You're crazy. Why are you doing this all by yourself?" Like that's like everybody I ran into at Austin City Limits in Austin when I was there was just like, "You're doing this by yourself? That's amazing. That's wild." And I'm interested, like, is that a normal thing? Am I wild for that? Like, what's the craziest solo trip you've been on? Like, message us on Instagram or comment or I don't care. Text me if you want. But I'm also interested in your guys' story. Like, there's a lot about, like, the title of this podcast is That Which Binds Us. And I think of that as, like, that which binds me and George. But I also see it as, like, that which binds us. Like, all of us listening here, we're connected simply because you're listening to this. So tell us some of your stories.
I got the same reactions. Whenever I've gone on solo trips of my own, I get questions from people about why I chose to go by myself. So people will ask you, and it's something that you're going to have to, respond to and feel comfortable with and try to be proud of yourself for.
Respond with authenticity.
Yeah.
Like, and understand, like, what it is you're doing and be honest about it. Like, people like authenticity. People like vulnerability. So do it. Meet the moment with vulnerability. Maybe that's my advice. Meet the moment with vulnerability.
I like that. Meet the moment with vulnerability. MTWMV. Meet the moment. No, I spelled that wrong. But
that wasn't it.
Meet the moment with vulnerability. MTMWV. MTMWV. Remember that, listeners. MTMWV.
And I am going to get that tattooed tomorrow.
Because MTMWV, that's what binds us.
Thank you for listening. We'll see you guys in the next one.
See you later.